The broken arms story. If you've been on Reddit for some time, you've probably seen someone mention broken arms in a completely unrelated thread. You can be in a thread about writing or just someone sharing their arm injuries, and someone jokes about broken arms or mom's help in the comments, and almost everyone knows that reference. And turns out, the joke always leads back to a single post from December 22, 2011, by a user called Verified Son, titled, "I am a man who had a relationship with his mother." Yes, the thread is about as you expect. The user was 14 years old, and one day, he injured both arms in an accident and temporarily couldn't use them. He kept the injury details vague to protect his identity, which is why the internet filled in the blank with broken arms, even though he never actually used those words. But what made it mind-blowing is that he got depressed, because he went from pleasing himself twice a day to nothing for about 2 weeks straight. He became so frustrated that he started taking it out on everyone around him. But luckily, his parents noticed the core problem and sat down to talk about it. So together, his mother and father decided that the mother would just handle it for him. She came to his room one afternoon and just began to help him. And then it just kept going further and further. It started with her hands, then mouth, and eventually they were in a full physical relationship. And it kept going way after his arms were healed. And it was not romantic at all. They kissed once, both thought it was gross, and never did it again, which is what led him to write in the thread. Guys having sex with his mom says kissing her is weird. Yes, out of everything that was going on, kissing was the one thing that fell too far. It ended the same way it started. It just quietly stopped. When he went off to college, things slowed down on their own, until they just stopped. He said neither of them wanted to go back to it, and that the family actually talked about it openly years later. He kept replying to comments in that thread from December 2011 all the way up to June 2012. 6 months of answers that never once contradicted each other. Reddit made up its mind that the story was real, and at this point, the meme had been around so long that nobody's going back to check anyway. The post-it notes. Imagine you wake up one morning and find a post-it note on your desk. It's in your handwriting. Reminds you of errands you had to run that day. Except you have absolutely no memory of writing it, and you live alone. That's exactly what happened to Reddit user R. Bradbury 1920. A Massachusetts man who started finding mysterious notes around his apartment in mid-April 2015. The first one showed up on April 15th, written in handwriting he didn't recognize, reminding him of personal errands he had never told anyone about. He convinced himself he must have written it in his sleep and forgot about it, which is a reasonable enough explanation until a second note appeared 4 days later on the back of his desk chair, telling him to make sure he saved his documents. At that point, he got scared enough to set up a webcam pointed to his desk, using a security app to record any movement in the room. What he didn't realize, because his brain wasn't working the way he thought it was, is that he had never actually configured the camera to record anything. He just placed it on a shelf, created a folder in his desktop called webcam, and assumed it was working. It wasn't. The notes kept coming. On April 20th, he found one that read, "Our landlord isn't letting me talk to you, but it's important we do." When he checked the webcam folder, there was nothing in it. But his computer's recycling bin had been emptied, which he was certain he hadn't done. To him, that meant someone had broken in, found the camera, and deleted the footage. He was now more convinced his landlord was secretly entering his apartment and leaving him messages. Then on May 1st, he found a blank post-it stuck to the outside of his door, with similar blank notes stuck to several other doors in the building. So in 2015, he posted the whole story to subreddit Legal Advice, asking whether he had any legal recourse against his landlord. The thread blew up quickly, with hundreds of people throwing out theories, but one comment cut through all of it. A user named Kakerlak had quietly scrolled through R. Bradbury's 1920s post history before replying. In a previous post on a home design subreddit, R. Bradbury 1920 had mentioned that his bedroom was a narrow, windowless room situated directly above a garage. That detail triggered something for Roach, because he had once nearly killed himself, his wife, and their dog by accidentally leaving a stove on inside their live-aboard boat, filling the cabin with carbon monoxide. Roach's comment suggested two possible explanations: a dissociative mental disorder or carbon monoxide poisoning. He mentioned that a CO detector was cheap and easy to get. R. Bradbury 1920 replied that he had actually been having really bad headaches lately. And oh, he did already own a CO detector. It was just still in the box. About 9 hours after his original post, R. Bradbury came back with an update. He had plugged in the detector in his bedroom, and it immediately read 100 parts per million. For context, anything above 70 ppm causes headaches, fatigues, and confusion. Between 150 and 200 ppm, A person can lose consciousness and die. R. Bradbury, 1920, had been sleeping in a windowless room above a garage at 100 ppm for at least 2 weeks, writing notes to himself in a confused, poisoned state, and then forgetting he had written them every single time. The deleted webcam footage never existed because he had never set the camera up properly, and the landlord had never been in his apartment. His update ended with a single-line summary. I had CO poisoning and thought my landlord was stalking me. The thread was reposted across Reddit and went massively viral. In 2018, Boston's NPR station produced a full podcast episode about the incident, interviewing Ken Roach and medical experts who confirmed that everything R. Bradbury 1920 described was completely consistent with carbon monoxide poisoning. R. Bradbury 1920 himself declined to be interviewed and has never posted publicly about it since. One random comment from a guy who almost died on a boat saved a stranger's life. The man who documented his own addiction. In September 2009, a 24-year-old man with a master's degree and a stable job posted to subreddit with a simple title, I did heroin yesterday. I am not a drug user and have never done anything besides pot back when I was a teen. AMA. Yes, the thread is about as you read. He went by Spontaneous H. His post explained that he had been sitting on a bench outside, doing nothing in particular. Then suddenly, a street dealer approached him. At first, he had no intention of buying anything and tried chit-chatting by asking the guy if he had marijuana. The dealer said no, only harder stuff. And then, for an unknown reason, which he himself couldn't fully explain, he bought heroin, went home, snorted it, and spent the next 10 hours on the best high he had ever felt. The post was actually casual. He said he had zero drug history, a little marijuana in his teenage years, rarely drank, had a good job, and had his life together. He told the thread confidently that he wouldn't be doing it again. But the people who responded didn't share his confidence. His comment section filled with warnings from users who knew exactly what heroin does to a person, explaining that the feeling he had just described was precisely what made it so dangerous, that the brain latches onto that sensation in a way that is genuinely difficult to override with willpower alone. Spontaneous H read all of it and replied thoughtfully, acknowledged the warnings, said he appreciated the concern, and then mentioned almost as a footnote that he did kind of want to do it again, but that he had strong self-control and wasn't worried. 2 weeks later, he posted again. The title said, 2 weeks ago I tried heroin once for fun and made an AMA. I've been using it since and shot up for the first time today. He had used heroin every single day since that bench, and now he had stopped snorting it and started injecting it, which is the point where casual use becomes something else entirely. The post updated in real time through the night as he went through withdrawal, and the updates got darker as the hours passed. At one point, he was sweating and throwing up, and typing directly into the comment section, begging people to help him hold on before he relapsed. Then, after the thread crossed 1,000 comments, another update came in. Because of this thread, his real life finally caught up to his addiction. A rumor had gotten out about his drug use. His girlfriend had found out, and she had ended the relationship. He wrote that he couldn't stop crying, that everything was falling apart, and that he wished he was trolling, and that none of it was real. When he went silent for several days after that, people in the thread began genuinely asking each other whether he was still alive. And he was alive, but barely. Within roughly 1 month of that first post, Spontaneous H woke up in a psychiatric hospital because of an overdose. Paramedics gave him Narcan, which is a drug that stops an overdose from killing you. But his overdose was so bad his body didn't respond to the first dose, so they had to give it to him again and again until it finally worked. From there, he posted that he was entering rehab, and then he went quiet. The people who had been following along mostly moved on and forgot about him. Then, on January 8, 2017, more than 7 years later, Spontaneous H came back with one final post to subreddit Opiates Recovery. He was almost 6 years clean and said life was good. He also admitted that the version of himself he had presented in that bench post, the stable guy with a master's degree who just made one weird impulsive decision on a bench, wasn't fully honest. Things in his life before the heroin probably weren't as fine as he had made them sound. He said he still couldn't bring himself to go back and read most of what he had written during those years. It was too hard. He has not posted since. The account sits there with its full 7-year arc intact, from a stranger on a bench to a hospital bed and a very long roadblock. The Ask-A-Grapist Thread. In July 2012, someone posted a question to subreddit Ask-Reddit, inviting people who had committed SA to share their motivations and whether they felt any regret. Within 2 days, the thread had pulled in somewhere between 12,000 and 13,000 comments, climbed to Reddit's front page, and set off a chain of events that eventually ended in a peer-reviewed academic journal. The confessions varied wildly. Some guys in the thread said things like, "She kept saying no, but I know she didn't mean it." Or, "She was drunk, so it just kind of happened." Or, "I didn't even think of it as assault at the time." Then they'd follow it up with something like, "I'm actually a really good person though." But the most discussed one came from a user who described assaulting multiple women over 3 years through coercion and alcohol, while being known in his community as a friendly, politically active volunteer who everyone liked. He described himself as a great guy, and he didn't seem to find those two things contradictory. What pushed the thread into genuinely disturbing territory was how other users responded to these confessions. People were calling the perpetrators brave and thanking them for their honesty, the way you'd respond to someone sharing a difficult childhood memory, not a confession to a violent crime. A survivor posted in the same thread saying the possibility that a rapist was on Reddit right now, getting praised by hundreds of people for describing how hard the experience had been for him, was making her physically sick. Around the same time, a Canadian psychiatrist named Dr. Rob Tarswell posted a separate Reddit thread saying the original thread was dangerous because reading other people's assault stories was making the criminals want to do it again. The same way watching a mukbang at midnight makes you want to order a burger even though you just ate dinner. He also argued the shared confessions were basically a free tutorial for anyone looking to pick up new tactics. The thread was eventually deleted after sustained pressure from media outlets, including Jezebel, Salon, and HuffPost. Its content had already been saved in an archive called the Museum of Reddit, though, which meant researchers could still access every word of it. A team from Georgia State University went through 68 of those confessions and published their findings in an academic journal in 2017. What they found was that nearly every perpetrator had a ready-made explanation for why what they did wasn't really their fault. The most common one, used in 37% of the accounts, was that no doesn't always mean no. Others blamed the victim, blamed their own biology, or stopped seeing the other person as a human being entirely. One perpetrator wrote that his victim had become just a path, a tool, a means to an end. The researchers' conclusion was simple. When people can explain away what they did, they never have to feel bad about it. And if they never feel bad about it, nothing changes. The Sleep app recording. On October 1, 2013, a single mother who goes by RedWantsBlue80 on Reddit downloaded an app called Sleep as Android. The app works by listening to you while you sleep and recording any sounds it picks up. Things like coughing, snoring, or rolling over, so you can track the quality of your sleep. She used it every night for 3 months and captured nothing unusual. Just ordinary bedroom sounds. Just her and her 3-year-old son, who slept beside her every night because he was afraid of the dark. Then, on December 30, 2013, at exactly 2:04 in the morning, the app recorded something. It starts with a clicking sound. Faint at first, then getting progressively louder over several seconds. Then her own voice comes through, groggy and half asleep, asking, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And then clearly, and without hesitation, a deep male voice answers, "Okay." Nothing. The clicking gets very loud after that. And at the very end of the recording, the same deep voice says something else. Though listeners have never agreed on exactly what. Some hear, "That's them." Others hear, "I'm Danny." Others hear her name, Jenny. She posted the recording to subreddit Ghosts in early January 2014, initially just looking for a rational explanation. Her own theory was that she had been talking in her sleep and somehow answered herself, which would explain the first voice, but not the second. She wrote in the post that the responding voice didn't sound anything like her, and definitely wasn't something a 3-year-old could produce. The comments blew up fast, and people ditched the ghost theories pretty quick. Someone had been getting into her house, standing in her bedroom while she and her kids slept, and even answering her. In October 2014, about 9 months after the original post, a Reddit user named Finn DeBaran submitted the audio to a formal voice analysis and posted the results. The findings were straightforward and difficult to argue with. Her voice asking, "What are you doing?" registered at around 265 Hz, which is a normal pitch for a woman's voice. The responding voice registered at 95 Hz, which the analysis described as relatively low even by male standards. The two voices were definitively different people, which ruled out sleep talking and ruled out her son. The only people who were supposed to be in that house were a woman and a 3-year-old, and neither of them had a voice that low. She had already started taking precautions by then, changing all her locks and improving her home security based on an advice from the thread. She also described waking up on a couple of other nights to the same clicking sound and trying to find where it was coming from, walking through the house toward her fan where it seemed to originate, only for it to fade the closer she got. At one point, she said she walked through every room and quietly asked whatever was there to please leave, adding that she felt like a complete idiot doing it. By April 2015, she posted her final update. She had moved out of the house. Her exact words were, "No more updates from here on out, thank God." The recording is still publicly available online. The voice analysis still stands. Nobody ever identified whose voice it was. Nobody ever explained how they got in. And nobody ever found out how many other nights the app simply didn't pick anything up. The comment that may have solved a cold case. On June 8, 1988, the last day of the school year, a 9-year-old boy named Scott Kleschult left his house in St. Charles, Missouri to play outside. He was wearing a black Rude Dog t-shirt, khaki jeans, and red and black Puma high tops. His sister saw him on a hill just yards from the house, and a neighbor spotted him walking down the street shortly after. It was a normal day for playing, but that was the last confirmed sighting of him. Around 6 that evening, a massive thunderstorm hit the area, and all the kids on the street came home, except Scott. His parents waited and assumed he'd taken shelter somewhere nearby. But when it became clear he wasn't coming back, they called the police. The next morning, 40 volunteers, dogs, and off-duty officers spread out across the trails. It's a 30-acre land with steep cliffs, tunnels, and caves behind the neighborhood where local kids played. The dogs actually found and followed Scott's scent nearly 5 miles, but a storm-soaked ground stopped the trail. After that, they expanded the search area and sent helicopters, bulldozers, divers, and ultrasound for the following 6 weeks with a $10,000 reward on the table. And still, they found nothing. Scott's body was never recovered, and they stopped the search. Then, in early 2016, a 20 days old throwaway account named AD33DVF9 posted a comment on an Ask-Reddit thread asking people to share stories about accidentally killing someone. It read, "This still haunts me to this day. As kids, we had a hideout in this dirt cliff. There was a neighborhood kid who was probably mentally handicapped in some way, but to us, he was just the weird, creepy kid. 3 of us found him sitting in our guard chair and told him to leave. He started throwing dirt and sticks at us, so we ran around the side to get up to him. It gets pretty fuzzy here, but all I remember is he fell. I still remember the sound. When we got back down, he was in a very awkward position with blood coming out of his mouth. We freaked out and ran home. And as far as I know, no one has spoken a word of this to anyone. This was the 80s. Chances are he got a small article somewhere. Missing mentally disabled child found dead after fall. Something like that. He even also posted a photo of the cliff. Then one day, a Redditor replied to his comment with a single question. Was the boy who fell that day maybe Scott Kleschult? Still missing to this very day. And then shortly after, the user deleted the comment and his entire account. But luckily, some Redditors on the subreddit Unsolved Mysteries managed to archive the post. They went through the account's history, and everything kept pointing in the same direction. The user had mentioned a TV show that only aired in the St. Charles area. Another comment placed his age at around 11 at the time of the incident, old enough to see a 9-year-old as the annoying kid who wouldn't leave them alone. The cliff photo matched terrain just over a mile from where Scott was last seen, and the victim he described, a boy with learning difficulties playing alone in the woods in the 1980s, matched Scott in every detail. This sus behavior made many Redditors contact St. Charles police, and by September 2016, local news reported investigators were actively pursuing new leads, with the timing pointing directly at the post. But the department maintained publicly that Scott had been abducted rather than killed accidentally, and no charges were ever filed. His mother Peggy was still living in the same house on Leverance Drive as of 2018, with the same phone number in case Scott ever called. If he were still alive, he would be 46 years old today. The murder confession that got 14,000 views. In May 2017, a man wanted for murder decided to post his side of the story on Reddit while he was still on the run from police. His username was RedIsBlue101, and he posted it to Canada News on May 1st, 2017, under the title, "Wanted for Kitchener Murder, My Side." The man behind the account was Ager Mohsin Hassan, a 24-year-old man from Hamilton, Ontario, and the girlfriend was 22-year-old Melinda Vasily. They had been together for about a year before Melinda sent him a text on April 3rd saying she was not happy anymore, and it just won't work. That same night, Hassan broke into her apartment uninvited to confront her, but Melinda managed to run, and he got into a physical fight with her roommate and the roommate's brother. Hassan ended up with criminal charges for break, enter, and assault. A judge released him on 2 conditions: stay out of the Kitchener area completely, and have zero contact with Melinda. But he didn't care, and still sent her over 60 unanswered text messages over the following weeks, which means he was violating a court order 60 separate times, and apparently didn't find that concerning. On April 27th, Melinda agreed to meet him in her apartment one final time to end things properly. That meeting started calmly enough, but at some point, Hassan admitted that he had slept with someone who had an STD and had passed it to Melinda without telling her. Melinda, understandably, lost it. She started hitting him, and according to Hassan's own account, that is when things escalated. What happened next, he described in his Reddit post as grabbing a knife in self-defense and hitting her back a few times out of shock and fear, and then running when he saw the blood. But he was convinced she had just passed out. When police arrived at Melinda's apartment in the early hours of April 28th, they found her dead. She had been stabbed 47 times, with 27 of those wounds being on her neck alone. Hassan had already crossed the US border into Buffalo by 5:45 that same morning. His Reddit post framed the entire thing as a tragedy that happened to him. He called Melinda his everything, said he planned to propose to her, and told her family he was sorry while also making clear he believed he had acted in self-defense. He said he was going to turn himself in once he had time to process what had happened. He was writing all of this from somewhere in the United States with $200 in his pocket and no change of clothes. The post stayed up for about 18 hours before Reddit removed it, but the images had already been viewed thousands of times, and the story had spread across news outlets including CBC, Global News, Vice, and HuffPost. But rather than going quiet after that, Hassan messaged police investigators directly through WhatsApp, offering to turn himself in if they agreed to a plea deal first. He posted a selfie video on Instagram. He allegedly made a fake Facebook account and used it to post on the memorial page Melinda's friends had created for her. He also allegedly sent a message to Melinda's mother telling her that her daughter's death was partially her fault, and that it was fine because she had other daughters. He spent over 2 months running before the US Secret Service agents finally caught up with him in San Antonio, Texas on July 11th, 2017. And the crazy part was they weren't even looking for him. The Secret Service had been running a completely separate investigation into fake currency being sold on the dark web, and Hassan just happened to get pulled into it. It's ironic how what led to his capture/arrest wasn't a Reddit post or the WhatsApp messages or any of the chaos he left behind. It was counterfeit money. They found him guilty of second-degree murder after 7 hours of deliberation, and the judge sentenced him to life in prison with no chance of parole until 2033. The Hotel Clerk. Imagine you were a college-aged woman driving alone across the country to a family reunion. It's late, you're hours behind schedule because of bad weather and a traffic accident on the highway, and all you want is a bathroom, a shower, and somewhere to sleep. You spot a small motel off a backroad highway in rural Virginia and pull in. It's dirty and cheap, but it'll do. You just need a few hours. The check-in window is on the outside of the building. The clerk looks you over and asks if you're traveling alone. You try to hand him your ID and credit card and he waves them off, telling you he only takes cash. He doesn't want any card or paper trail with your name on it. Red flags are going off, but you're exhausted, and you've already scraped together enough cash, so you take the key and find your room. But when you get there, the room is tiny and filthy. You flip the mattress and find signs of bed bugs, and there's a cockroach living rent-free around you. So you decide you are not sleeping in there and go back to your SUV instead, curling up in the rear cargo area with a suitcase for a pillow and a pile of clothes as a blanket. Within a few minutes, you're asleep. At around 3 in the morning, you wake up to someone talking on a phone outside. You peek out and see the clerk standing nearby. He finishes his call, walks quietly over to your room, unlocks the door with his own key, and goes inside. The light never turns on. A minute or two later, he comes back out, slamming the door and cursing, and he has someone with him, a second man. You had not seen this second man enter the room at any point during the night, which means he had been inside that room the entire time you were in there inspecting it, standing quietly in the dark while you looked around. The two men talk to each other in angry voices. Then the clerk walks over to your SUV. You pull a shirt over your head and stay completely still. He tries the door handle, finds it locked, and presses his face against the window to look inside. Luckily, between the tinted glass and you're buried under clothes, he doesn't see you. The two men walk toward a diner across the street, still talking, gesturing in that direction. The moment they turn away, you climb into the front seat, start the engine, and drive away. They turn around when they hear the engine, but you've already driven away. This is the story that Larry Gilger posted as a comment on Ask Reddit on June 2015, in a thread asking people to share the scariest thing that had ever happened to them at a hotel. The thread pulled in over 6,500 comments, but her reply stood out so much that it eventually got its own dedicated article, a viral TikTok with 2.4 million likes, and became one of the most retold stories in Reddit history. She said it happened about a decade before she posted, back when she was in college around 2005. About 3 weeks after the incident, her friends helped her track down the motel on Google Maps, and she called the local police. Officers took her information and informed her that the motel had closed down just days before she called. The place was not even supposed to be open the night she pulled in. The two men were never identified. No charges were ever filed, and she never found out what they had planned or whether anyone else made that same stop. I have a seat in hell. In 2016, a user called I Have a Seat in Hell posted to subreddit confessions with the title, I cyberbullied a girl to the point where she killed herself. When the user was 15, he was sitting in math class next to a girl who was overweight and regularly picked on at school. Though he wasn't one of the people doing it. One day, he accidentally knocked her bag off her desk and reached down to pick it up. But for some reason, she reacted loudly. Because of this, the teacher intervened in the drama, and he got sent to the principal's office and given detention. He went home that night convinced he'd been untreated fairly, and that feeling built up into something worse as the evening went on. He found her on Facebook, sent her a friend request, and she accepted it. Over the next 3 hours, he sent her message after message, calling her worthless, telling her she was fat, and telling her to kill herself with a razor. At one point, she wrote back asking him to stop, but he didn't stop, and kept going until she finally blocked him. After that, he closed his laptop and went to bed. As far as he was concerned, it was over. By then, she wasn't in school the next day, and the day after that either. By Monday, the local newspaper reported that she died after cutting her wrists in her room, using the exact method he described in his messages. Because his father was friends with her father, skipping the funeral wasn't an option. So he went. He hugged her crying mother, shook her father's hand, and stood in that room as the only person who knew what had actually led to that moment. Years went by, and one day he ran into the dead girl's sister at a movie theater. They got talking, kept in touch, and eventually started dating for 5 years. Over those years, she'd opened up to him about everything. Her father's depression and attempt to take his life, her mother leaving the family, the way the whole family had collapsed after losing her sister. He told all that without knowing who she was actually talking to. The post ended with a single sentence. She doesn't realize that she's living with her sister's killer. The account was a throwaway, created just for that post and never used again. It disappeared so fast that no archiving service managed to capture it, and nobody has ever connected it to a real case or a real name. It could be a genuine confession from someone who needed to say it out loud just once, or it could be fiction, written by someone who knew exactly how to make it land. There's no way to know, and whoever wrote it made sure of that before they left.